Amelia Carter didn't cry when her mother slid the train ticket across the kitchen table without a single word of goodbye. She picked it up, pressed it flat against her palm, and walked out the front door before her sisters could see her face. Behind her, she heard one of them laugh a bright, sharp sound like something breaking. She didn't look back. If they wanted her gone, she would go. But she would not go as a woman who had been thrown away. She would go as a woman who had finally been set free. If this story speaks to your heart, subscribe to our channel and follow Amelia's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment below. Tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning Amelia Carter left Missouri, the sun hadn't fully risen yet. She stood at the edge of the front porch with one leather suitcase in her hand. A suitcase so old the brass clasps had turned green, and she listened to the house breathe behind her. The kitchen window was lit. She could hear her mother moving around inside the scrape of a cast-iron pan, the hollow clunk of a coffee cup set down too hard. No one had come out to see her off. Not her mother, not her father, not either of her sisters. She had lived in that house for 25 years. She had cooked every Sunday meal for the last 8 of them. She had sewn her sisters' dresses, mended her father's work shirts, and sat at that kitchen table through enough cold Missouri winters to know exactly what every creak and groan of that old house meant. And not one person had opened the front door to say goodbye. Amelia shifted the suitcase from one hand to the other. She was a big woman, tall for her time, full-figured in a way that Missouri society had never been quiet about. Her hips were wide, her arms strong from years of real labor, her face soft and round with color in her cheeks. She had her grandmother's brown hair and her grandfather's stubbornness, and she had learned early on that in a house full of slender, delicate daughters, she would never be the one anyone looked at first, unless they needed something lifted, unless they needed something done. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the letter she had read so many times, the fold lines had gone white. Not the letter William Dawson had written back to her. The other one. The one she had found entirely by accident 3 weeks ago, tucked behind the sugar canister in the kitchen pantry, where her sister Delia kept things she didn't want found. It was a copy. Delia had kept a copy of what she sent, the way cruel people sometimes do, to read back to themselves later and laugh. To whom it may concern. My name is Amelia Carter of Carter County, Missouri. I am 25 years of age, unmarried, hardworking, and plain in both manner and appearance. I am accustomed to heavy domestic labor, and ranch life would suit my constitution well. I am not a delicate woman. I do not require comfort or luxury. I require only a roof and a purpose. I am available immediately. That was it. No warmth, no humanity, no truth. Delia hadn't written that Amelia could read 3 languages. She hadn't written that Amelia had taught herself arithmetic from their father's accounting ledgers when she was 12, or that she could break down the mechanics of a broken water pump faster than any man on the county line. She hadn't written that Amelia had a laugh that made rooms feel larger, or that she had a way of sitting with a person in pain that made them feel less alone. She had written plain, heavy, available immediately, like advertising a plow horse. Amelia had stood in that pantry with the letter in her hands, and she had understood with a clarity so cold it felt almost peaceful exactly what her family had done. They had answered a mail-order bride advertisement, one placed by a wealthy rancher in Wyoming Territory, a William Dawson of Laramie County. And they had used her name, her age, her description. They hadn't asked. They hadn't told her. They had simply decided that here was a chance to be rid of the embarrassing daughter, the heavy one, the one who didn't attract suitors at church socials, the one their mother introduced last and their father forgot to introduce at all. They had sent her away on paper before they ever put her on the train, and their plan, she had understood this too, standing in the pantry, was humiliation. They expected this William Dawson to take one look at the woman who arrived on his doorstep and send her right back on the next train east. They expected her to return to Missouri with nothing, no husband, no prospects, no dignity left to speak of. They expected the whole county to hear about it. The fat Carter girl shipped west like surplus goods rejected by a stranger. Then she'd have no choice but to be grateful for whatever small life they permitted her. That was the plan. Amelia had put the letter back behind the sugar canister. She had walked out of the pantry. She had sat down at the kitchen table and eaten supper with her family that evening without saying a single word about what she'd found. And the next morning, she had written back to William Dawson herself. Not the letter Delia had sent. Her own letter. She had told him the truth, that there had been a misrepresentation, that she was not what had been described, or rather that the description had been designed to diminish her, and she wanted him to know that before he made any decisions. She told him she was large in frame and would never be a small woman. She told him she was capable, educated enough to be useful, and honest enough to be trusted. She told him she did not know what he was looking for in a wife, but that she would rather be turned away with dignity than accepted under false pretense. She had almost not sent it. She had held it over the candle flame once, watching the corner of the paper go brown and curl before she pulled it back and sealed it. 3 days later, a reply came. Not the reply she expected. William Dawson had not written a romantic letter. He was not a man she would learn who wrote romantic letters. What he wrote instead was something she had read so many times in the weeks since that she could recite it from memory standing at the edge of her family's front porch with her green-clasped suitcase in her hand. Miss Carter, I appreciate honesty above most things. The description my advertisement received was not what I would have wanted, and your correction of it tells me more about your character than any number of flattering words could have. I am a widower with a son and a ranch that requires a capable partner. I am not a charming man, and I will not pretend to be. What I can offer is a home, fair treatment, and respect. If those terms suit you, I will expect you on the afternoon train to Cheyenne on the 14th. W. Dawson. A home, fair treatment, respect. She had read those 3 words more times than she'd read anything in her life. In 25 years in her father's house, she had never been offered all 3 at once. The train whistle sounded 2 blocks down, and Amelia Carter picked up her suitcase and walked away from the only home she had ever known, without a backward glance. She did not cry on the train. She had expected to. She had prepared herself for it the way you prepare for weather you know is coming. You don't stop it, but you dress for it. She had tucked an extra handkerchief into her coat pocket and chosen the window seat so she could turn her face away if she needed to. But the tears didn't come. What came instead was something quieter and stranger, a loosening. Like a knot in a rope that had been pulled tight for so long, the rope itself had forgotten what loose felt like, and then someone finally carefully worked the knot free. Missouri fell away behind her. The flat farmland gave way to rolling hills, then to something larger and more open than she had ever seen. She pressed her forehead against the glass and watched the country change, and she thought about her mother's face that morning, not turned away, not absent. She had looked, actually. Amelia had glanced back once just before she turned the corner of the lane, and her mother had been standing at the kitchen window with both hands wrapped around her coffee cup, watching. She had not waved, but she had watched. Amelia turned back to the window and let the west come to her. The other passengers on the train were a mixed congregation of souls, a family of 7 spreading into 3 rows, 2 traveling salesmen who smelled of boot polish and ambition, a young couple who held hands across the armrest between their seats, like they were afraid the train might shake them apart. A woman in the seat across the aisle was knitting something red and enormous, her needles clicking in a steady rhythm that was almost meditative. No one paid Amelia much attention. She was used to that. Or rather, she was used to the wrong kind of attention. The sidelong glances in church, the way conversations at social functions always seemed to reroute themselves away from her, like water finding the easier path. Her sisters moving slightly ahead of her when they walked into a room so that they arrived first and she arrived second, always second. Here on this train, in this car full of strangers, she was simply a woman traveling west. It was, she thought, a good beginning. She ate the lunch she had packed herself, salt bread and dried apple, because no one at home had thought to prepare her a farewell meal, and she read from the small book she had tucked into her coat pocket alongside the handkerchief. It was a book about the territories. She had borrowed it from the county library 2 weeks ago, and had not yet returned it, which she supposed made her a woman who had committed her first theft in the service of self-education. Wyoming Territory. Population spread across vast distances. Cattle ranching as the primary industry. The land itself described as severe and beautiful in equal measure, unforgiving in winter, relentless in summer, the kind of country that broke people who weren't made for it and made people who were. She closed the book and looked out the window again. Made for it, she thought. She had always suspected that the life she had been given was not the one she had been made for. Maybe Wyoming was where that other life had been waiting. She arrived at the Cheyenne station on the afternoon of the 14th, exactly as the letter had specified. The platform was busy men in work clothes, families with luggage stacked around their feet, a cluster of soldiers in blue, a woman selling newspapers from a basket on her arm. The summer heat was immediate and different from Missouri heat, drier and sharper, the kind of heat that had no patience for hesitation. Amelia stepped off the train and stood on the platform with her suitcase and let the crowd move around her while she looked for a face she had never seen. She had no photograph of William Dawson. She had described herself in her second letter, and he had acknowledged the description without offering one in return, which she had found either admirably practical or mildly aggravating, depending on the hour of the day she thought about it. She was scanning the crowd methodically, the way she did most things when she heard a voice. "Miss Carter?" Not a question, a statement. She turned. He was standing about 10 feet from her, slightly apart from the flow of the crowd, the way a large tree stands apart from the brush around it, not deliberately, just because that's where it grew. He was tall, considerably taller than she had imagined, with the kind of build that came from decades of physical work, and not from any particular vanity about it. Brown hair dark enough to look almost black in the station's shadow. A weathered hat he held in his hands, rather than wearing, which struck her immediately as a mark of respect she hadn't anticipated. His face was the face of a man who had been outdoors in hard weather for most of his adult life, lined at the corners of his eyes, firm at the jaw, and his expression was serious without being unfriendly. He was, she registered with some surprise, a handsome man. Not handsome. The way the men her sisters talked about were handsome, groomed, and conscious of it. Handsome the way a good piece of working equipment is handsome, like form, following function so naturally that beauty emerges without being intended. He was looking at her directly. Not at her figure, not past her, at her face. "Mr. Dawson," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He took 2 steps forward and extended his hand, and she shook it, a real handshake, firm and brief. "How was the journey?" "Long," she said, "but I'm here." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, more like a door opening 1 inch. "I expect you are." He reached for her suitcase before she had thought to hand it to him, and she let him take it because it seemed to be instinct for him rather than performance, and they walked off the platform together into the Wyoming afternoon. The ride to Dawson Ranch took 2 hours. They traveled in a wagon that was clean but plainly maintained, pulled by a pair of sorrel mares that moved with the easy steadiness of animals that knew this road well. William drove with the reins loose in his hands, sitting straight but not rigid. And Amelia sat beside him on the bench and looked out at the country she had read about in the library book. It was nothing like Missouri. Missouri was green and close, the land folded around you in soft hills. This was open in a way that made her chest feel both larger and smaller, at the same time larger, because there was so much sky smaller, because that sky made clear how brief and small a single human life was beneath it. She had expected awkwardness. She had prepared remarks. A few pleasant observations about the landscape, some practical questions about the ranch operations, things that would fill silence without requiring either of them to speak honestly about the strangeness of the situation. William spoke first. "I want to say something before we arrive." "All right. I know this arrangement is not ordinary." He kept his eyes on the road. "I've thought about how to say this for a few days now, and I haven't found a better way than plain. So plain is what you'll get." "Plain is what I prefer," she said. He nodded as if she'd confirmed something he'd guessed. "I'm not a man who'll pretend. I'm not looking for a performance from you, and I won't give one. My son is 8 years old. His name is Samuel. His mother died 3 years ago from fever, and he's had a harder time of it than a boy his age should. The ranch needs a capable person who can manage a household and learn the operation. Those are real needs, and I'll treat you honestly and fairly in exchange for real work. That's what you offered in your letter, she said. I know. I'm saying it again so you hear it with your own ears, not just on paper. He was quiet for a moment, and the wagon wheels made a low, steady sound against the dry road. I don't expect you to love this place right away. It takes some getting used to, and I don't expect... He paused. I don't expect more from you than what we agreed to. Amelia looked at the side of his face. He was staring straight ahead, and his jaw was set with the careful tension of a man who was not accustomed to speaking this much about things that mattered. Mr. Dawson, she said, can I ask you something? Go ahead. The advertisement you placed. You could have received letters from many women. Why did you reply to mine, specifically the one I wrote myself, not the one that was sent on my behalf? The mares walked on. The road curved around a low rise, and on the other side she could see the first suggestion of Dawson Ranch in the distance. A roof line, the dark lattice of a fence line, the vertical strokes of what might be a windmill. Because, William said, and his voice was slower now, more deliberate. Every other letter I received was a woman telling me who she thought I wanted her to be. Yours was the only one that told me who you actually were. Amelia looked back out at the road ahead. Even the unflattering parts, she said. Especially those, he said. She didn't say anything else for a while. And somehow in the silence that followed, something settled between them that was not yet understanding, but was perhaps the ground from which understanding might eventually grow. Dawson Ranch was larger than she had imagined. She had pictured something modest, a working spread, utilitarian functional. What she saw as the wagon rolled through the gate was a property that had been built with intention. The main house was substantial, 2 stories of weathered timber with a covered porch along the front that ran the full length of the building. Beyond it, she could see a barn, a bunkhouse, several outbuildings, and the fence lines running out in multiple directions, defining the borders of a cattle operation that had clearly been built by someone who thought in decades rather than seasons. 3 ranch hands were working in the yard as the wagon pulled up. They stopped when they saw it coming. They looked at Amelia with the particular measuring look of men assessing a situation they weren't sure about, and she looked back at them with the particular steady look of a woman who had been assessed by skeptics her entire life and had stopped flinching. William climbed down from the wagon and set her suitcase on the ground. Boys, he said, which was apparently sufficient. The men went back to work. A 4th figure appeared at the corner of the porch, small, cautious. 8 years old, with his father's dark hair and his father's serious expression, wearing dungarees that were slightly too short, and holding a tin cup in both hands like it was something valuable. He looked at Amelia. She looked back. Samuel, she said. The boy didn't answer right away. He glanced at his father. Samuel, William said. Come and meet Miss Carter. Samuel came down off the porch steps one at a time, deliberate and careful, and stopped about 4 feet from Amelia. He looked up at her with an expression she recognized. She had worn it herself often enough. The expression of someone bracing for a disappointment. Hello, she said. She didn't bend down to be eye level with him, because she had always hated when adults did that treating children like animals you had to get small for. She just stayed where she was and let him look at her. I heard you like reading. Samuel blinked. How'd you know that? Your father mentioned it in his letter. The boy looked at his father with something that was almost accusation. You wrote about me. 1 line, William said. What did you say? That you existed. Samuel turned back to Amelia with the slow consideration of a child recalibrating. Do you like reading? Very much. What do you read? History mostly. Mathematics when I'm anxious. And novels when I want to be somewhere else for a while. The boy thought about this. The tin cup was still in his hands. We got a shelf of books in the parlor. They were my mama's. Papa don't read them." "I might," Amelia said. "If that would be all right." Samuel looked at her for another long moment. Then he turned and went back up the porch steps and inside the house, which was not a welcome and was not a rejection, and was, perhaps she thought, the best she could reasonably hope for on day one. The first hour in the house told her almost everything she needed to know. William showed her the parlor, the kitchen, the 2 rooms upstairs, one of which would be hers, separate from his, which she had expected and felt quietly grateful for. The house was clean in the way a house is clean when the people in it are trying, but are managing without the particular sensibility that makes a house feel like more than walls and furniture. Things were functional. Nothing was comfortable. The kitchen had good equipment and no warmth. The parlor had the shelf of books Samuel had mentioned still in the order his mother had left them, and Amelia suspected no one had touched them in 3 years. She asked William if she could have a few minutes to settle in before supper. He said yes and went back outside. She sat on the edge of the bed in her room for exactly 3 minutes and allowed herself to feel every complicated thing she was feeling. The exhaustion of the journey, the strangeness of the place, the sheer improbability of being here at all. The part of her that had been told her whole life she was too much and not enough, both at once, that looked at this bare room and thought, this is all you get. Then she stood up, unpacked her suitcase, and went downstairs to start supper. She found a pot of dried beans that had been soaked. Someone had started them, probably William, and left them, and salt pork and cornmeal, and a jar of something she took for wild plum preserves. Not much. Enough. She was standing at the stove when a voice behind her said, "Papa burns the beans." She didn't turn around. "How long have they been soaking?" A pause. "Since this morning." "Then they're ready. Do you know where he keeps the salt?" Another pause, the sound of a cupboard door. A small hand set a salt cellar on the counter beside her. "Thank you, Samuel," she said. She heard him climb onto the wooden chair at the kitchen table. Not the chair at the head, she noted, but the one on the side slightly back from where he could see the stove and also the door. The position of a child who had learned to keep an eye on exits. She cooked and the boy watched, and the kitchen filled with the smell of something honest and warm, and neither of them talked for a long while, which was its own kind of conversation. When William came in from outside, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table set with 3 places, the beans simmering, the cornbread in the pan, and something moved across his face that he didn't quite manage to keep out of his expression. Something that was not hunger, or not only hunger. "Smells different," he said. "Better or worse?" she asked, not looking up from the pot. "Better," he said. Then, as if the word had surprised him by coming out, "Ma'am." She turned and caught the edge of his expression before he got it put away again. She filed it carefully in the part of her mind where she kept things that mattered but couldn't yet be spoken about. They ate. Samuel ate 2 full portions, which William noted with an expression that was the closest thing to open emotion she had yet seen from him. After supper, the boy excused himself and went upstairs, and William helped her clear the plates, which she had not expected. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. They stood at the kitchen basin in the last light of the Wyoming evening, and the quiet between them was different from the quiet on the wagon, less careful, less studied. More like the quiet that happens when people are simply in the same place, and neither of them is pretending. "Your son is watching to see whether I'll leave," Amelia said. William set a plate on the drying board. His hands were still for a moment. "He's done that before." "I know. You can tell. I've spent most of my life watching people watch exits," she said. "I recognize it." William turned to look at her, then directly the way he had at the train station. It was a particular kind of looking, not appraising, not cataloging, just present. Like he was actually registering the existence of the person in front of him, rather than the category he had put her in. "I told Samuel you'd be here for a while," he said. "I didn't tell him what a while means because I didn't know." "What does it mean?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a night bird called twice and went silent. I reckon that depends on both of us, he said. She turned back to the basin. Fair enough, Mr. Dawson. Will, he said. My father was Mr. Dawson. I never got comfortable with it. She handed him the last plate to dry. All right, she said. Will. He dried the plate and set it with the others, and then he put on his hat and went outside to check on the horses before dark, and Amelia stood at the kitchen window and watched the first stars appear over the Wyoming plain, one at a time, like they were being lit by hand. In Missouri, her family sat at their supper table that same evening. Her mother had cooked the meal. Her sisters were there, Delia, who had written the letter, and who was waiting with the pleased patience of a cat for the telegram that would announce the disaster, and Cecilia, younger, softer, who had known about the prank, but had not spoken against it, which was a different kind of cruelty, and not a smaller one. Delia said at some point during the meal, "Reckon she's already been sent back." Her father didn't respond. He rarely responded to things that required a moral position. Her mother said nothing. Her hands moved her fork around her plate, and she looked out the window at the evening, and she looked, if you happened to notice, like a woman who had just done something she could not undo and was beginning very slowly to understand what that meant. Cecilia said, "Maybe she's all right." "Don't be sentimental," Delia said. "She'll be back by the end of the month." The table went quiet. In Wyoming, in a house that smelled like honest food and night air, Amelia Carter lay in a bed that was hers, not borrowed, not permitted hers, and looked up at the ceiling of a room where no one had placed her out of charity or shame, and she thought, not this time. This time she thought, I am not going back. Outside the plain stretched in every direction, under a sky more full of stars than she had ever seen, and the horses were quiet in the barn, and the boy was asleep down the hall, and in the room at the other end of the upstairs, a man she barely knew was lying awake in the dark, and thinking about a plate set at his kitchen table, 3 places instead of 2, and the sound of someone who moved through a house like they meant to stay in it. This time Amelia Carter thought, pulling the quilt to her chin, they were wrong about me. And for the first time in 25 years, she fell asleep without being afraid of the morning. She had been wrong about one thing. She had assumed the hardest part of arriving at Dawson Ranch would be the first night. The strangeness of a new bed, a new house, a new name to answer to at breakfast. She had prepared herself for that specific kind of hard, the way you brace for a particular pain you've been warned about. She had not prepared for the morning. Amelia came downstairs at 5:30 to find the kitchen already occupied. Not by William. He had been up and out to the barn since before first light. She would learn this was simply how he moved through his days before the world had finished, deciding what kind of day it would be. The kitchen was occupied by a woman named Ruth Hensley, broad-shouldered and somewhere past 60, who was standing at the stove with the proprietary confidence of someone who had been standing at that stove for years and did not intend to be displaced from it. Ruth looked at Amelia when she came through the doorway. Amelia looked back. "You're up early," Ruth said. "I'm always up early." Ruth made a sound that was not agreement and not disagreement and turned back to the stove. "I come in 3 mornings a week to help with the cooking and the wash," she said to the wall above the stove. "Been doing it since Mrs. Dawson passed." "I see," Amelia said. She moved to the basin and began washing her hands. "What do you make for breakfast?" "Eggs and salt pork, same as always." "Do you use the preserved plums?" A pause. "Those are for baking." "I know. I thought I might make a plum sauce for the pork, if there's enough to spare." She dried her hands and came to stand beside Ruth at the stove, close enough to see what was in the pan. "My grandmother used to do it. It changes the whole meal." Ruth looked at her sideways. Not hostile, measuring. "You cooked last night?" "Yes." "We'll ate 2 plates." Amelia said nothing because it didn't seem to require a response. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she took the jar of plum preserves from the shelf and set it on the counter without a word. It was not friendship, but it was something. They cooked together without speaking much, and when William came in from the barn at 6 o'clock and stopped in the kitchen doorway, he looked at the 2 of them standing side by side at the stove, and something in his expression went very still, like a man who sees a thing he wasn't expecting and needs a second to understand what it means. "Morning," he said. "Sit down," Ruth told him, which was apparently how Ruth addressed William Dawson, and which William Dawson apparently accepted without objection. Samuel came down at 6:15 in the particular way of 8-year-old boys, not walking exactly, more like a controlled descent into wakefulness, and stopped dead at the bottom of the stairs when he smelled the kitchen. "What's that?" he said. "Breakfast," Amelia said. "It smells different." "So I've been told." Samuel came the rest of the way into the kitchen and climbed into his chair. He looked at the plate Amelia set in front of him, with the deep suspicion of a child who has learned that things that smell good don't always taste the way they promise. He took one bite. He looked up at her. He took another bite and said nothing, which from Samuel she was learning was the loudest kind of approval. William watched all of this over his coffee cup and did not say a word, but when he thought she wasn't looking, he watched her the way a man watches something he hasn't decided what to do about, yet carefully, and with more attention than he intended to give. Ruth, for her part, washed the pan and left by 7. On her way out the door, she paused and said to Amelia without turning around, "Baking day is Thursday. I'll show you where he keeps the flour." It was still not friendship, but it was closer. The first week established a rhythm, and the rhythm told her more about this place than any conversation could have. William was up before dawn every single day. He came in for breakfast, ate quickly and without waste, and went back out. He came in for the midday meal if he was working the near pastures, skipped it entirely if he was out on the range. He came in for supper, reliably sat at the head of the table, and ate with the focused attention of a man who had spent years treating food as fuel and was slowly, reluctantly remembering that it could be something else. He did not talk at meals. He listened. This surprised her. She had expected taciturn in the way of men who had nothing behind the quiet blank walls that looked like depth. But William's quiet was different. It was the quiet of a man who was paying attention to the room, filing away what he heard, thinking about it later in the way that solitary people do. She caught this on the third evening when she mentioned offhand that the supply of salt pork would run short before the next supply run if they kept up the current rate of use. She had not been speaking to him directly. She had said it more to herself, making a note she would address in the morning. William said without looking up from his plate, "I'm going into town Friday. I'll add it to the list." She looked at him. "I didn't realize you heard that." "I hear most things," he said, and went back to eating. She filed that away too. Samuel was her more complicated education. The boy was quiet like his father, but where William's quiet was chosen, Samuel's was protective. He had learned at some point, she suspected around the time his mother died, and perhaps again when some of William's earlier attempts at replacement had gone wrong, that the people who appeared in his life were not necessarily people who would stay. So he held himself back. He watched. He set small tests without knowing he was setting them, the unconscious experiments of a child trying to calculate risk. She passed some without knowing she was being tested. On the second day, he left a book on the kitchen table, his mother's copy of a collection of folk tales she could tell by the inscription in the front cover, and went out to the yard. When she came through the kitchen later, she picked it up, looked at it, and set it back exactly where it had been. When he came back inside, he looked at the table and then at her and said nothing. She understood he had put it there to see if she would take it. She hadn't. On the fourth day, she came into the parlor to find him sitting at the window, doing nothing. Not reading, not playing. Just sitting with an expression she recognized because she had felt it herself at 8 years old. The particular weight of being too young to understand what was wrong and too old not to feel it. She didn't sit beside him. She didn't say anything cheerful. She crossed to the bookshelf, took out one of his mother's novels, sat down in the chair across the room, and started to read. After about 10 minutes, he said, "What are you reading?" "Moby Dick," she said. "Have you read it?" "No." "Is it good?" "It's long. Whether it's good depends on how you feel about whales." A pause. "I don't know how I feel about whales." That's all right. I didn't either until I started. She looked up at him. Do you want to hear the first chapter? He looked at her like she might be setting a test of her own. Then he climbed down from the window seat and sat on the floor near her chair, cross-legged with the careful nonchalance of a child, pretending he wasn't doing the thing he was actually doing. She read to him for 45 minutes. When William came in from the range at noon, he stood in the parlor doorway and saw his son asleep on the floor at Amelia's feet, with his head on his arm, and Amelia reading quietly by the window light. William stood there for what felt like a long time, and she looked up and their eyes met, and neither of them said anything. He went to the kitchen and started coffee, and she heard him moving quietly so as not to wake the boy, and she kept reading very softly to the sleeping child. It was the end of that first week when Amelia understood that Dawson Ranch had an enemy. She found out the way she found out most things in her life, by paying attention when other people thought she wasn't. She had walked into town with Ruth on Friday morning, the supply run William had mentioned, and she was standing outside the dry goods store waiting for Ruth to finish inside when she heard her name from the other side of the barrel display. Two women, not visible, their voices carrying clearly over the general noise of the main street. Saw her at the wagon on Monday, large as a draft horse, I'm told. Poor Will. Well, what did he expect advertising in the papers like that? He's not going to get a real woman that way. Eleanor says she gives it 2 weeks, 3 at most. Eleanor would know. A laugh. Light, dismissive. Amelia picked up a jar of apple butter from the display, examined the lid with studied interest, and noted the name Eleanor with the careful attention she gave to things that were going to become relevant. She got her answer when she walked back down the main street with Ruth and came face to face with Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor Whitmore was 28 years old, and exactly what the West produced when wealth and beauty and insufficient resistance combined. A woman who had learned early that she was the most admired person in most rooms and had organized her entire identity around maintaining that position. She was slender and fair-haired, and dressed in a way that required money to look that casual about money, and she stood on the boardwalk outside the milliner's shop with 2 friends arranged slightly behind her, the way followers arrange themselves behind a woman who expects to be followed. She saw Amelia coming. She did not move aside. Amelia kept walking and stopped when they were 3 feet apart, which was closer than Eleanor had expected. She could tell by the slight adjustment of posture. "You must be the new Mrs. Dawson," Eleanor said. "Not yet," Amelia said. "And you must be Eleanor Whitmore." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. That she knew the name without being told was not what Eleanor had anticipated. "I see Will mentioned me." "He didn't," Amelia said. "You were mentioned nonetheless." Eleanor smiled, which did not involve her eyes at all. "I hope you're finding the ranch comfortable. It's a very remote life. Not everyone adjusts." "I've been adjusting to difficult situations my entire life, Miss Whitmore. I find I'm rather good at it." Eleanor's smile thinned. How charming. She glanced at Amelia's figure with the particular precision of a woman who uses her eyes like a blade and knows exactly where to cut. "Wyoming winters are very hard on the Constitution. You'll want to be sure the arrangement suits you before you get too settled." Amelia looked at her steadily. "Thank you for the concern," she said. "I'll keep it in mind." She walked past Eleanor Whitmore and kept her pace even and her spine straight and did not glance back, and Ruth fell into step beside her. And after half a block, Ruth said very quietly, "That one's been after Will since his wife passed." "I gathered. She ain't going to make it easy for you." "I didn't come here for easy," Amelia said. Ruth made the sound again, the one that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite disagreement. But this time Amelia thought it was leaning closer to the first. She told William about Eleanor that evening. She had debated whether to. It was the kind of thing a woman in her position might keep to herself, file away as her own problem to manage, not wanting to seem like she was manufacturing drama or asking for protection. But she had promised herself when she wrote that second letter to him that honesty was going to be the foundation of whatever this was, and so she told him directly while they were washing up after supper. She told him what was said on the street. She didn't embellish it, and she didn't soften it. William was quiet for so long, she thought he might not respond at all. Then he said, "Eleanor Whitmore has been trying to buy the east pasture from me for 2 years." She looked at him. "Buy it, I thought. Her father, Lionel Whitmore, wants the water access. There's a creek that runs through my east boundary. Whoever controls it controls water rights for the next 3 properties east of mine." His jaw tightened. "I've said no every time. And Eleanor's method of negotiation is different from her father's." He set the last plate on the board and dried his hands and looked at her with an expression that was direct and also slightly uncomfortable, which was the expression of a man being more honest than he was used to being. "She made it clear a year ago that she'd be willing to simplify the matter, if I was open to it. She offered herself as a solution to a land dispute," Amelia said. "In essence. And you weren't interested." "I wasn't interested in being managed," he said, "which is what it would have been." He put down the dish towel. He looked at her with the direct, careful look she was beginning to understand was simply how he looked at things he was serious about. "I placed that advertisement," he said, "because I needed someone who'd come here to build something, not someone who wanted something I had." Amelia considered that for a moment. "She's going to cause trouble." "Probably. Her father, more than her, if the land is what he actually wants." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. More like recalibration. Like he'd made an estimate and the actual figure had come in higher than he'd expected. "Yes," he said. "That's my read too." "All right," she said. "Then we should probably think about what documents you have on the water rights. Because if they're going to come at you legally, you want to be certain your claim is clean." He stared at her for a long moment. "Where did you learn to think like that?" "I grew up watching my father lose arguments he should have won because he wasn't prepared," she said. "I decided early on that preparation was the better strategy." She hung up her apron. "Do you have a deed of survey for the east pasture?" "In the office, filed under the county records." "I'd like to look at it. Tomorrow, if you're willing." He was still looking at her with that recalibrated expression. Then he said, "I'll get it out tonight." She went upstairs. Behind her, she heard him go to his office, and through the floor, she heard the sound of a desk drawer opening and papers moving. And she sat on the edge of her bed and thought about Eleanor Whitmore's eyes and what lived behind them, and about Lionel Whitmore, and about water, which in this country was the same thing as survival. She also thought for one brief, unguarded moment about the way William had said someone who'd come here to build something. She pressed her palm flat against the quilt. Build something, she thought. She could do that. The second week was when the ranch hands began to change. There were 4 of them living in the bunkhouse. Pete, who was oldest and moved like a man whose knees had filed their formal complaints. A young man named Cord, who couldn't have been more than 20, and rode like he'd been born on horseback. A quiet man named Dutch, who spoke maybe 40 words a day and made each one count, and a 4th named Holt, who was her problem. Holt was 32, good-looking in an uncomplicated way, and had the particular brand of confidence that comes from being the person in a room who's never been seriously challenged. He'd been at Dawson Ranch for 4 years. He was good at his job, William had told her, and William was not a man who said that easily. He was also, Amelia determined by the end of the first week, the kind of man who communicated his opinion of women primarily through the mechanism of not addressing them directly. He spoke around her. He'd bring something to William's attention when she was standing right there, and it was something he easily could have told her. He'd answer questions she asked by answering them to Pete instead. She let it go for the first week because she was new, and she understood the architecture of doubt. She stopped letting it go on a Tuesday morning when she came to the barn to check on a mare that had been favoring her left foreleg the day before, and found Cord there ahead of her, looking uncertain, and Holt standing with his arms crossed. "It's a soft tissue strain," Amelia said, because she had looked at the leg the evening before, and she was fairly sure. "She'll need a week off the work rotation and cold compresses twice daily." Holt looked at the barn wall. "Cord right out and get Will. He'll want to decide about the mare. Mr. Dawson is in the north pasture checking the fence line, Amelia said. That will take him 2 hours to get back from. The mare doesn't need him to decide this. Holt looked at the barn wall. Cord? Cord, Amelia said, and her voice was even and clear and did not move. Please get the cold compresses from the tack room. There's a bucket of creek water left from this morning that'll work. Cord looked at Holt. Holt looked at the wall. Cord went and got the compresses. Holt left the barn without a word. Amelia knelt beside the mare and began working on the leg, and Cord watched her, and after a minute he said carefully, "He don't mean anything by it." "He means exactly what he does," she said. "He just expects no one to say so." She looked up at Cord. "The mare will be fine. I've treated this before." "Where'd you learn it?" "Missouri farm. We didn't have the money for a vet, so I learned what I needed to." She looked back at the leg. "Holt been here long?" 4 years. "He close to the previous Mrs. Dawson?" A pause. "Different close. She depended on him a lot, for things that needed doing around the house and such. After she passed, I think he figured I don't know. It ain't my place." "No?" Amelia agreed. "It ain't." But she had heard what was in the gap. Holt had positioned himself in the years since William's wife died as the person who kept this household running, who filled the space, who made himself indispensable. And now she was here, and the space was filling differently, and Holt was watching his particular form of importance contract. She finished with the mare's leg and stood up. "Thank you, Cord," she said. "Keep those on for 20 minutes and then let her rest." She walked out of this barn and back toward the house, and as she turned the corner of the bunkhouse, she nearly walked directly into Holt, who had clearly been waiting. He was leaning against the wall with his arms still crossed. He looked at her with the expression of a man who's chosen to do a thing he knows isn't graceful. "I've been running this ranch's day-to-day for 3 years, he said. "I know," she said. "Will trusts me." "I expect he does. I'm saying—" He stopped, recalibrated. "I'm saying there's a way things work here, a system. It'd be better for everyone if you understood it before you started making changes." Amelia looked at him. He was taller than her, which was not always true, and broader, and he had the physical confidence of a man who had spent his life in open-air labor. She had met men like this before. Men who weren't cruel exactly, but who had organized their sense of themselves around a specific arrangement, and who experienced the shifting of that arrangement as a personal attack. "Holt," she said, "I'm not here to dismantle what works, and I'm not going to get out of your way either." She kept her voice level. "The mare needed tending, and you were going to wait 2 hours rather than let a woman make the call. That's not a system. That's a habit, and it's not one I'll be working around." He stared at her. "I'd like to understand how the ranch works," she continued before he could answer. "You know it better than I do. If you're willing, I'd find it useful to hear how you organize the work rotation and how you read the weather patterns for the range. I'm not a proud woman when it comes to learning." The muscle in his jaw moved. He was not expecting that. Men who expected a fight often didn't know what to do when it didn't arrive. "Tomorrow morning," he said finally, "before the work starts." "Thank you," she said. And she meant it, which was the part he really couldn't account for. She walked back to the house and climbed the porch steps and paused with her hand on the door. Across the yard, she could see Cord emerging from the barn, and Dutch coming from the direction of the equipment shed, and Pete moving around the side of the water trough, and the whole motion of the place continuing around her, and she understood that she was standing at the center of something that was trying to decide if she was part of it. She opened the door and went inside. The document that mattered was a survey filed with Laramie County in 1878. She spread it on the kitchen table that evening. William had brought it from the office, a rolled sheet of paper with faded ink and official stamps. And they stood on either side of the table, and she went through it the way her father's accountant had gone through ledger pages, methodically starting at the corners and working in. "Here," she said after about 10 minutes. She pressed her finger to a line of text near the bottom of the survey description. "Do you see this?" William leaned over the table. He read the line. Read it again. That's the creek designation. Yes, but read the qualifier. He was quiet for a moment. It says, seasonal tributary. It does. Which means if Whitmore's legal claim is based on water rights to a permanent waterway, this could complicate his argument significantly. She straightened up. Who filed this survey? County Surveyor, Amos Carey. He's still in Cheyenne, far as I know. Do you have a relationship with him? I know him. Not well. You should talk to him before Whitmore does, she said. If Whitmore is planning a legal move, he'll want to control the interpretation of this document. Carey's testimony about what he meant by seasonal could be the difference. William was looking at her across the table with an expression she was starting to learn, not the recalibration expression, something closer to it, but different. The expression of a man who is being surprised repeatedly by the same person and is beginning to understand that it's not a coincidence. You read legal documents, he said. I read everything, she said. I told you that in my letter. I suppose I didn't realize what it meant in practice. She started to roll the document back up. You should also think about whether any of your ranch hands have witnessed the creek's behavior across seasons. Cord's been here 2 years, Pete longer than that. Eyewitness accounts about seasonal patterns could support your position. He took the document from her hands to help roll it, and for a moment, their fingers were both on the paper, and neither of them moved for a beat longer than was strictly practical. And then she released it, and he rolled it and tied the string around it. Thank you, he said. Not the way he said thank you to Ruth. The way a man says thank you when he means more than the words. She went to put the kettle on and didn't say anything, and the kitchen held them both in its particular quiet, and outside the Wyoming night moved over the land. And Lionel Whitmore sat in his house 3 miles east and thought about water. The letter from Missouri arrived on a Thursday 14 days after she left. Ruth brought it from town with the other mail she had gone for supplies and set it on the table without comment. Amelia saw the handwriting on the envelope while she was kneading bread dough and recognized it immediately. Cecilia. Her younger sister, the softer one, the one who had known and not spoken. She finished the bread. She set it to rise. She washed her hands and dried them, and then picked up the letter and took it to the back of the kitchen where she stood with her back to the room. She opened it. Dear Amelia, I wanted to write to tell you that Delia and Mama expected you back by now. They haven't said so directly, but it's plain. I think they thought Mr. Dawson would have sent you home. Are you all right? I'm asking honestly, not to report back. I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I should have. I know that doesn't help. Cecilia. She read it twice. Then she folded it and held it in both hands and stood very still for a moment. She thought about her mother at the window. She thought about Delia's bright, sharp laugh. She thought about 25 years of being the one who was tolerated. Then she went to the small desk in the parlor corner, took out a piece of paper and wrote, Dear Cecilia, I am all right. I am better than all right. I am in a place where my work matters and my presence is not a joke, and a small boy reads himself to sleep at night with the book I gave him. I am not coming home. Amelia. She sealed it and left it on the mail table for the next supply run. And she went back to the kitchen and punched down the risen bread and shaped it into loaves, and she did not feel the things she expected to feel. She felt instead something that was so unfamiliar she almost didn't have a name for it. Certain. She felt certain. Samuel came downstairs an hour later, following the smell of baking bread like it was a map, and she gave him the end piece while it was still warm, and watched him eat it standing up at the counter, and he looked at her over the bread and said, You're going to stay, aren't you? It was not quite a question. Yes, she said. He chewed. He thought about this with the deliberate processing of a child who has learned to check twice. Okay, he said finally, and went back upstairs. And Amelia Carter stood at that kitchen counter in the middle of Wyoming Territory, with flour still on her hands, and she felt the ground beneath her settle into something that had not been there the morning she walked out of her family's house with a green-clasped suitcase and a train ticket, and no one waving goodbye. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That was the moment Holt coming in through the back door to leave his field report on the counter, the way he'd started doing. She'd noticed leaving it where she could see it. not dropping it at the bunkhouse for William to find, caught a look at her face before she had time to arrange it, and stopped in the doorway. He looked at her hands on the counter, the bread on the board, the absolute solidity of her standing in that kitchen like it was a place she had always been going toward. He set the report on the counter. "Weather's turning," he said. "Might be a hard rain before the week's out." "Thank you, Holt," she said. He left, and outside 3 miles east, Lionel Whitmore signed his name to a document his lawyer had prepared and folded it and handed it to his man to deliver to the county courthouse by Friday. The ground was shifting, and Amelia Carter was standing on it with both feet. The document from Lionel Whitmore's lawyer arrived at the county courthouse on a Friday just as Holt had predicted the rain. Amelia found out about it. Not from William. He hadn't told her yet. She would understand why later, but from Ruth, who heard it from the clerk's wife at the dry goods store on Saturday morning, which was how most things of consequence traveled through that part of Wyoming, not through official channels, but through women standing in stores with their ears open and their mouths quiet until they had something worth saying. "Whitmore's filed a water rights claim," Ruth said, setting a paper sack on the kitchen table without ceremony. "Says the creek is a permanent tributary of the Laramie River system and falls under territorial water law." Amelia did not stop kneading the dough in front of her. "When was it filed?" "Friday noon." "And Will knows. Sheriff wrote out yesterday evening. So yes." Ruth looked at her with the careful attention of a woman who has learned to read situations accurately. "He didn't tell you?" "No." "That bother you?" Amelia turned the dough. "It tells me something." She finished the bread, covered it, and walked directly to the office at the back of the house, a room she had been in twice both times to look at documents William brought out to her. She knocked once and opened the door without waiting. William was sitting behind the desk with the water rights survey spread in front of him and 2 other documents she didn't recognize yet. He looked up when she came in, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has been managing something alone for so long that being walked in on feels like a violation even when it isn't. "You know," he said. "It wasn't a question. Ruth told me." She came to the desk and looked at the papers. "What are the other 2 documents?" He was quiet for a beat, the beat of a man deciding whether to keep managing alone or to let someone in. Then he turned them so she could read them. Whitmore's claim and his lawyer's supporting argument. She read both. She read slowly, the way she read things that mattered, tracking the language with the same methodical attention she had given the survey. The kitchen went quiet behind her. Outside, the first suggestion of the rain Holt had predicted moved in the sound of wind changing direction. "He's arguing continuous use," she said. "He's claiming his cattle have watered from the creek for 15 years, and that establishes prior right." "That's their argument." "Is it true? Have his cattle use the creek?" William sat back. "In wet years, the creek runs wide enough that it crosses onto Whitmore land at the south bend. His cattle can reach it from his property then. But in dry years, it doesn't reach. The south bend goes to mud and stops." She put down the document. "Then it's seasonal. Exactly what the survey says." She looked at him directly. "Will, why didn't you tell me last night?" His jaw tightened. "I was working out how to handle it. You were handling it alone. That's how I handle things." "I know," she said, "and I understand why. But I found something in this document 2 weeks ago that may be the most important piece of your defense, and you almost didn't tell me there was a case to defend." She kept her voice even, not angry, clear. "I'm not asking you to need me. I'm asking you to let me be useful." The room held that for a moment. William looked at her across the desk. She had the sense, not for the first time, that he was measuring something about her against a standard he hadn't fully articulated even to himself. "Amos Carey," he said finally. "The county surveyor. I sent word to him this morning." "Good. What did you say?" "Asked him to come out to the ranch and look at the creek himself. If he can testify to the seasonal nature from personal observation, it carries more weight than the document alone." "When can he come?" "Wednesday, if the weather holds." She nodded. Pete and Dutch. We need their accounts of how the creek runs in dry summers. Written if possible. Signed. I'll talk to them today. She started for the door, then stopped. Turned back. Will, I need you to tell me things like this when they happen. Not because I can't manage not knowing. Because we'll do better if you do. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes that he didn't put into words, but he nodded. Once. The nod of a man who doesn't make promises lightly, and understood he'd just made one. She went back to the kitchen. The bread had risen. Wednesday came without Amos Carey. A letter arrived instead by the morning rider, and William read it at the breakfast table with an expression Amelia had not yet seen on him. Not the controlled blankness he used for minor frustrations, something harder and less managed. He set the letter down. Carey's not coming, he said. Amelia looked up from Samuel's collar, which she was mending, while the boy ate because he had torn it on a fence nail and simply accepted walking around with a torn collar as a fixed condition of his life until she noticed it. Why? He says he's been retained by Whitmore's legal firm to provide an expert survey assessment. William's voice was flat in the way that meant it was working to be flat. He's testifying for them. Samuel put down his fork. He was 8 years old, but he had been listening to adult conversations through walls for 3 years, and he understood tone, if not always content. He looked at his father's face, and then at Amelia's, and then back at his plate. Can he do that? Amelia said. His assessment is technically independent. He can testify for whoever retains him. Whitmore got to him first. Yes. She set down the mending. When did Whitmore retain him? The letter doesn't say. Before or after you sent word to Carey, would you guess? William picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking. Before. Probably the same day the claim was filed. He looked at the wall above the stove with the expression of a man recalculating how far ahead the other side had been thinking. Whitmore planned this. Yes, she said. He did. She looked at Samuel. Eat your breakfast. Samuel picked up his fork. Is there another surveyor? She asked. Nearest qualified man is in Cheyenne, surveyor named Aldous Marsh. But I don't know him, and without Carey Whitmore's legal team can argue any independent survey I commission is self-serving. Carey's testimony was the cleanest path, she said. It was. The kitchen was quiet, except for Samuel's fork against his plate, and the rain that had finally arrived and was working steadily against the window. Amelia looked at the letter still on the table. She looked at the way William's hand was set on the table beside his cup, not relaxed the precise stillness of a man controlling something. There's another way, she said. He looked at her. Territorial records, she said. Not the county survey. The original federal land grant when this territory was opened. The federal designations predate the county records and take legal precedence. She had read this in the library book she hadn't returned. She had not known at the time that she would need it. If the creek is designated as a seasonal waterway at the federal level, Carey's testimony doesn't change that. William stared at her. Federal land records are in Cheyenne, at the Territorial Land Office. I know. That's a 2-day ride. I know that too. He was looking at her with the full force of his attention now, the way he looked at things he was seriously considering. You're suggesting I go to Cheyenne. I'm suggesting one of us goes to Cheyenne, she said. You can't leave the ranch right now with the Whitmore pressure on and the weather turning. Holt can't manage the legal end of it. Ruth can hold the house. She looked at him steadily. I can go. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man deciding how much he trusts a person. Amelia, I can read the documents. I know what I'm looking for. I know the argument we're building. She leaned forward slightly. Will, who else is going to go? Another long moment. I'll write you a letter of authorization, he said. So the land office will release the records to you. Thank you. You'll take Cord with you, for the road. All right. He looked at her for one more moment with an expression she could not entirely name, something between concern and something that hadn't fully formed yet. Then he stood and went to the office to write the letter, and Samuel watched him go, and then looked at Amelia. "You're going away," the boy said. "3 days," she said. "4 at most." His face did the thing it did when he was processing something he didn't want to feel. "Okay," he said in the voice that meant it was not entirely okay. She put her hand briefly on top of his and then picked up the mending again. "I'll bring you back a book," she said, "from the Cheyenne Library if there is one." He considered this. "Do they have anything about horses?" "I'll find out." He went back to his breakfast. She left Thursday morning before first light with Cord beside her on the wagon seat and William standing on the porch in the gray pre-dawn with his hat in his hands, which she had come to understand was how he stood when he was feeling something he wasn't going to say. She did not look back this time either, but for a different reason than when she left Missouri. The road to Cheyenne was long and the weather was unpredictable, and Cord was good company in the way of young men who haven't yet learned to perform at conversation, he said. What came to him? Let silences sit without filling them, and had strong opinions about horses that he expressed with a directness she found refreshing after a lifetime of people who talked around everything that mattered. "Holt told me what you said to him," Cord said somewhere in the first hour. "About the mare, and about the system." "Did he?" "He said you were harder to argue with than he expected." She watched the road. "How did he say that, frustrated or otherwise?" Cord thought about it. "Otherwise," he said. "I think." She nodded. "He's been different since then," Cord offered. "More I don't know. Like he's paying attention differently." "Good," she said. The Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne was a low building with high ceilings, and the particular smell of old paper and institutional purpose, and the man behind the counter was a clerk named Bevers, who had the look of someone who had processed a very large number of requests and had no strong feelings about any of them. He looked at William's letter of authorization. He looked at Amelia. He looked at the letter again. "This authorizes a Mrs. William Dawson," he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you Mrs. William Dawson?" She had read the letter on the road. Will had written Mrs. William Dawson with the deliberate intention of a man who understood that a woman traveling alone to a government office with a letter signed by a man was more likely to be served efficiently if the letter implied a marriage that was technically still pending. She had thought about this for approximately 20 miles and had arrived at the conclusion that it was practical rather than presumptuous, and that she would address the technicality with him when she returned. "I am acting on behalf of Mr. Dawson's household," she said, "under his written authorization which you are holding." Bevers looked at her for another moment. Then he processed the request without further comment, which was the victory of preparation over objection. The federal land designation took her 40 minutes to find in the record books. She asked Bevers twice for clarification on the indexing system, which he provided with the neutral efficiency of a man who had stopped forming opinions about women in land offices, somewhere around his 5th year on the job. And there it was. Creek designated in the Federal Land Survey of 1874 intermittent waterway, seasonal flow, Class 3 water designation under Territorial Ordinance. Class 3, seasonal, federal level. Whatever Amos Carey said on behalf of Lionel Whitmore, he was saying it in contradiction of a federal document 11 years old. She had Bevers make a certified copy, which cost 40 cents and was worth everything, and she folded it into the inside pocket of her coat and walked out into the Cheyenne afternoon, and stood on the boardwalk and pressed her hand flat against her coat over the document and felt her heartbeat against her palm. "You find it," Cord said. He had been waiting outside with the horses. "I found it," she said. He read her face rather than her words, and a slow grin came across his. "We going back tomorrow?" "First light," she said. She was not expecting Eleanor Whitmore to be in Cheyenne. She should have thought about it. In retrospect, the logic was plain. If Lionel Whitmore had planned this carefully enough to retain Carey before William even knew the claim was filed, It was entirely possible he had people watching for activity from the Dawson side. And Eleanor was many things, but she was not stupid. Amelia saw her across the hotel dining room that evening. Cord had insisted she eat a proper meal, and she had not argued because she was hungry, and the alternative was cold bread from the supply pack. Eleanor was at a table near the window, with a man Amelia didn't recognize, silver-haired and well-dressed in the way that meant lawyer or banker, and the distinction didn't much matter. Eleanor saw her at the same moment. Something crossed Eleanor's face, surprise then calculation in that order, and very fast. Amelia took her table. She ordered her meal. She did not look at Eleanor's table again, which was not the same as not being aware of it. Halfway through her meal, Eleanor appeared at her elbow. "Miss Carter," she said. "What a coincidence." "Is it?" Amelia said. She did not stand. She did not invite Eleanor to sit. Eleanor sat anyway, which confirmed what Amelia had already understood about her. She moved through the world, assuming she was welcome everywhere, and the assumption had never been sufficiently challenged. "I didn't know you were coming to Cheyenne," Eleanor said. "No reason you would." "What brings you?" "Personal business," Amelia said, and ate her supper. Eleanor watched her with the particular focus of a woman trying to calculate what she knew. "The land office closes at 5, she said conversationally. "I imagine whatever personal business brought you here is finished for the day." Amelia looked at her then, directly. "Eleanor, I know who you were having dinner with. I know what your father filed. And I know that you're sitting here because you want to understand what I found today." She set down her fork. "I'm not going to tell you, but I'd like you to tell your father something for me." Eleanor went very still. "Tell him," Amelia said, "that he would have done better to settle this quietly before involving lawyers. Because the road it's on now leads somewhere he's not going to like." She picked her fork back up. Eleanor stood. Her composure was intact. She was too practiced to let it crack in public, but her eyes were hard. "You're very confident for a woman who arrived here 6 weeks ago," she said. "I'm confident for a woman who did her research," Amelia said. "Good evening, Miss Whitmore." Eleanor left. Across the room, the silver-haired man was watching Amelia with an expression that was professional and assessing. She met his eyes once briefly and then returned to her meal. Her hand was steady. She was surprised to notice this. She arrived back at Dawson Ranch on Saturday afternoon. William came out of the barn when he heard the wagon and walked toward her across the yard with the particular stride of a man who has been waiting for something and is managing not to show it. And she climbed down from the wagon seat and reached into her coat and held out the certified copy before he was close enough to take it. He took it, read it again. When he looked up, something had changed in his face. Not relief, too simple. Something bigger and more complicated than relief. The look of a man who has been bracing for a blow for long enough that when the blow doesn't land, his body doesn't quite know what to do. "Federal designation," he said. "Class 3, seasonal flow. Filed in 1874. She held his gaze. "Carey can say whatever Whitmore pays him to say. He can't say it in contradiction of a federal document without committing perjury." William looked at the document and then at her. The afternoon light was hard and direct, and he didn't look away from it, and she could see in his face something working its way toward the surface that had been kept under for a long time. "Amelia," he said. "I also ran into Eleanor Whitmore at the hotel." He went still. "What happened?" "I told her to tell her father that the road he's on leads somewhere he won't like." She watched his face. "Was that too much?" A long pause. "No," he said. "It wasn't." Cord took the wagon to the barn, and they were left standing in the yard, and William was still holding the document, and she was watching him hold it, and the particular quality of the silence between them was different from any silence they had shared before. "Samuel's been sleeping with the parlor light on," William said. "Since you left." She looked at him. "He has a nightlight. He did when he was small. He stopped 2 years ago. He put it back Tuesday night." He looked down at the document. "When I told him you'd likely be back Saturday, he put it away again." She absorbed this. He doesn't want me to know he was worried, she said. No. Like his father, she said. It came out more directly than she intended, and she didn't pull it back. William looked at her. The expression on his face was open in a way she hadn't seen before. Not performed openness, not managed. Just a man whose guard had come down by degrees over enough days that he hadn't fully noticed until it was mostly gone. Yes, he said quietly. Like his father. She took the document from his hand because his hands needed to be empty for what she was going to say next. Will, she said, I need to tell you something and I want you to let me finish before you respond. He nodded. I know what this arrangement was when I came here. I know what you offered and what you didn't offer. I haven't expected more than what you said. She kept her voice even. But I want you to know that this place has become real to me. The ranch, Samuel, Ruth, even Holt in his difficult way. This is not a performance for me. I'm not managing until something better comes along. She looked at him steadily. I'm here because I want to be here, and I think you should know that. The yard was quiet. A horse moved in the barn behind them. William looked at her for a long time with an expression she couldn't entirely read, and then he did something she had not expected. He reached out and took the document back from her hands. Not abruptly, just gently, and held it at his side and said, When my wife died, I thought I decided that was the end of certain things for me. That I'd had that part and lost it, and that was how it was going to be. He looked down at the document and then back at her. I was wrong about a lot of things. I'm starting to think this was one of them. She waited. I don't know how to do this, he said. Whatever this is becoming. I don't have the, I'm not. He stopped, started again. I'm not a man who's good at this. I know, she said. That doesn't bother you. Will, she said. And there was something almost like warmth in it, something that hadn't been there in the early weeks. I grew up in a house full of people who were extremely good at saying things they didn't mean. I'll take a man who's bad at saying things over that every time. He looked at her. Something broke open in his expression. Not dramatically. Not in the way of novels, but in the quiet, specific way of a thing that has been holding too long finally being set down. He didn't say anything else, but he held the door open for her when they went back inside, and he sat at the kitchen table without being called while she put the kettle on. And when Samuel came pounding down the stairs having heard the wagon, his footsteps carrying every feeling he was pretending not to have, and launched himself to a stop at the kitchen doorway, and looked at her with an expression of studied nonchalance. So poorly assembled, she almost laughed. She simply handed him a square of cornbread from the morning and said, There's a bookshop in Cheyenne. I found 3 volumes on horses. They're in the bag. Samuel looked at the bag on the floor by the door. He looked at her. He picked up the bag and went upstairs with a dignity so carefully maintained. She waited until she heard his door close before she let herself smile. Will, sitting at the table with his coffee, watched this exchange. And when she turned from the stove, she caught a look on his face that he made no effort to conceal, something unguarded and warm, and a little unsteady, like a man standing in sunlight after a long time in the cold, not yet sure if it's safe to believe in it. She turned back to the stove, but she was smiling. The notice from Whitmore's lawyer arrived on Monday. It was a formal letter delivered by the county courier addressed to William Dawson, and marked with the seal of a law firm out of Cheyenne she hadn't heard of, but which the formality of the stationery suggested had significant intentions. She was the one who brought it in from the post. She read the outside. She set it on the desk in William's office without opening it and went back to the kitchen. When William came in at noon and read it, he came to find her in the kitchen with a look on his face that was no longer the complicated expression of a man working through feeling. It was clear and cold and operational. They've filed for an emergency injunction, he said, to restrict cattle movement to the east pasture, pending resolution of the water rights claim. They want to keep your cattle away from the creek while the case is being argued, she said. If they get the injunction, I lose access to the primary summer water source for 300 head. His voice was controlled. The case will take months, maybe longer. They're not trying to win the lawsuit, she said. They're trying to win without the lawsuit. If your cattle can't reach water through the summer, you can't sustain the herd. You'll have to sell. She looked at him. And Whitmore will offer to buy, at a price that looks like generosity compared to the alternative. Will's jaw set hard. That's the plan. Yes. She pulled the federal document from the kitchen drawer where she had kept a copy. But an injunction requires a judge to find probable cause. If we present the federal designation before the injunction is ruled on, a reasonable judge dismisses it. The hearing is Thursday, he said. Then we need a lawyer by tomorrow. I don't have a lawyer. I know. Do you know anyone in Cheyenne who does? Marsh, he said suddenly. The surveyor. He's done work for half the ranchers in Laramie County. He'll know who to call. Can you reach him today? I can ride. She handed him the copy of the federal document. Take this, and take Pete's written account. Did he sign it? Yesterday. Both, and the original survey from the county. She looked at him. Go today. Don't wait for tomorrow. He took the documents. He looked at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with the legal matter, and everything to do with the woman standing in his kitchen, with her hands steady and her mind 3 steps ahead and her feet planted on his floor like she had been there for years. I'll be back tonight, he said. I'll keep supper. He put on his hat and went out. Amelia stood at the kitchen window and watched him ride out of the yard fast and direct the way he did everything, and she pressed her hand to the window frame and thought about injunctions and water and 300 head of cattle and a boy upstairs reading about horses and a man who didn't know how to say the things he felt, but was learning slowly to let someone see them anyway. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the Wyoming summer pressed down on the land dry and relentless, the way it had pressed down every summer for 1,000 years before any of them got here. And somewhere 3 miles east, Lionel Whitmore sat in his study and waited for Thursday. He did not know about the document. He did not know that the woman he had counted on knowing nothing had spent 3 days in Cheyenne finding exactly the thing that would undo him. He did not know yet what kind of woman Amelia Carter was. He was about to find out. William came back from Cheyenne that night with a lawyer. His name was Edgar Pruitt, and he arrived at Dawson Ranch at 9:30 on a Monday evening, smelling of road dust and pipe tobacco, carrying a leather satchel that looked like it had survived more courtrooms than most men Amelia had met. He was somewhere in his late 50s, lean and deliberate in his movements, with the particular economy of a man who had learned long ago that nothing he did in front of a judge should look hurried. He sat at the kitchen table, and Amelia set coffee in front of him, and he looked at the document she placed beside the cup with the focused attention of a professional assessing a problem he had been handed without enough time. He read the federal designation first. He read it twice. "Where did you get this?" he said. "Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne," Amelia said. "Certified copy, filed 1874. Pruitt looked at William. "Your wife went to Cheyenne for this." "She's not my wife yet," William said. "She went, yes." Pruitt looked back at Amelia with a recalibration so small she almost missed it. "And this was your idea?" "The federal records predate the county survey and take legal precedence," she said. "If the creek designation at the federal level is seasonal, Whitmore's claim of continuous use rights is built on a foundation that doesn't exist." Pruitt picked up the document again. "You understand land law." "I understand how to read," she said, "and I had a good reason to read carefully." He almost smiled. "The injunction hearing is Thursday at 10. Judge Emmett Hale. He's fair, but he moves fast, and he doesn't like to be in a courtroom longer than he has to be." He set down the document. "If I present this at the hearing, Whitmore's lawyer will argue the federal designation is outdated and superseded by territorial practice." "Can he make that argument successfully?" William asked. "He can make it. Whether it holds depends on whether Hale gives weight to federal primacy or territorial custom." Pruitt tapped the document. But this isn't your only problem. Amelia looked at him. Whitmore's lawyer is James Carver, Pruitt said. I know Carver. He doesn't file injunctions. He isn't certain he can win. If he filed on Thursday, he has something else. Something beyond Carrie's testimony. What kind of something? William said. A witness, most likely. Someone who can testify to continuous use on Whitmore's behalf with enough standing that a judge takes it seriously. Pruitt folded his hands on the table. Do you know who that might be? The kitchen was quiet. Then Amelia said, Holt. Both men looked at her. Think about it, she said, keeping her voice even, though something cold had moved through her when the thought arrived. Holt has been on this ranch 4 years. He knows the creek. He knows when it runs wide and when it doesn't. And before I came, she stopped, thought about it carefully. Holt had a different relationship with this household, with everything here. William went very still. He wouldn't, he said, but the word came out with a slight delay that told her he was running the same calculation and arriving at the same place. Has Carver contacted anyone at the ranch? She asked Pruitt. I don't know who Carver's contacted, Pruitt said. But if I were building a case and I needed a witness with direct knowledge of the land, I'd go to the men who worked it. William pushed back from the table and stood. His face had gone to the controlled blankness that meant something underneath it was working hard. I need to talk to Holt. Will, Amelia said. He stopped. Go carefully, she said. If you go at him like an accusation, you'll get nothing useful whether he's involved or not. And if he isn't involved, you'll have broken something you don't need to break. He looked at her for a moment. The muscle in his jaw moved. Then he put on his hat and went out to the bunkhouse, and Pruitt watched him go, and then looked at Amelia. You've been here how long? He said. 7 weeks, she said. He picked up his coffee. Interesting 7 weeks. You could say that. She did not hear what passed between William and Holt that night. She was upstairs when William came back in, and she heard the sound of the office door closing below her, and she lay in her bed and looked at the ceiling, and thought about all the ways a thing can look solid right up until the moment it isn't. She had trusted her read of Holt. She had believed after the morning at the barn, and the field reports left on the counter, and the weather warning delivered like a small peace offering, that he had shifted. That what she'd read in him was a man adjusting to a new reality, not a man managing her perception while he made a different calculation. She might have been wrong. She had been wrong about people before. She had grown up in a house that had taught her the primary lesson that the people who smiled at your face were often the ones arranging things behind your back. She had thought she was past being surprised by it. The sound of the office door opening again. Footsteps on the stairs. William's door at the end of the hall. She waited. An hour passed. Then she heard his footsteps again, quieter this time, and a soft knock at her door. She sat up. Come in. William opened the door and stood in the frame. He did not come in. He was the kind of man who kept to the line between spaces. She had learned in the particular way of men who took boundaries seriously because they expected others to take them seriously too. It wasn't Holt, he said. She let out a breath she hadn't fully registered she was holding. You're certain? He was angry when I asked him. The right kind of angry, a man who's been doubted, not a man who's been caught. William leaned against the doorframe. He told me Carver's man came to the bunkhouse 2 weeks ago, while you were in Cheyenne. Tried to talk to all 4 of the men. About the creek. About everything. The land, the operations, the water usage. Cord told him nothing, and went and told Holt. Dutch didn't answer the door. Pete apparently told Carver's man that he'd been on ranches from Texas to Montana, and this was the best run one he'd ever worked, and then closed the door. Something loosened in Amelia's chest. And Holt? Holt told him that if Lionel Whitmore wanted information about Dawson Ranch, he could come ask William Dawson himself, and then he walked Carver's man to the property line. She sat with that for a moment. He didn't tell you, she said. When it happened? No. Why not? William was quiet for a moment. He said he didn't want to bring it to me because he wasn't sure I'd believe he'd turned the man away. A pause. He said he knew there was doubt about where his loyalties were, and he didn't know how to prove it except by acting and hoping I'd notice eventually. Amelia looked at her hands in her lap. He was protecting you, she said, by not making you doubt him before he had a chance to demonstrate he shouldn't be doubted. Yes, that's a lonely way to operate. It's how he's always operated. William's voice had shifted, something in it that wasn't quite regret but was related to it. I should have made it clearer earlier, what I valued from him. You can make it clearer now, she said. He looked at her. In the low light of the hall lamp behind him, his face was tired and complicated and entirely honest. How do you do that? He said. Move through a situation that's trying to break something and come out the other side still looking for what can be fixed. I had a lot of practice, she said. And I learned early that if you spend all your time looking at what's broken, you miss what isn't. He was quiet for a long moment. Get some sleep, she said. Thursday is 3 days away, and we need your head clear. Yes, ma'am, he said with the ghost of something that was almost a smile, and closed the door, and she heard him go back down the hall. She lay back down. She stared at the ceiling. Outside, Wyoming was very dark and very large, and full of things trying to take what didn't belong to them. She closed her eyes. She slept. Tuesday brought the second twist. It came in the form of a rider Amelia didn't recognize who arrived at the ranch at mid-morning, on a horse that had been pushed hard and carried a letter he delivered to William personally and waited while William read it. She watched from the porch. She watched William's face while he read, and what she saw in it made her come down the porch steps and cross the yard without being called. The rider left. William was holding the letter at his side, and when she reached him, his face was doing something she had never seen it do before. The controlled blankness was gone entirely, and what was underneath it was something rawer and less ordered. Will, she said. He handed her the letter. She read it. It was from a lawyer she didn't know, writing on behalf of a name. She didn't know a man named Thomas Aldgate of Denver, Colorado, and what it said in the careful legal language of a man making a significant claim was that Thomas Aldgate held a promissory note against Dawson Ranch signed by a man named Robert Dawson, dated 1879, for the sum of $4,000. Robert Dawson. Will's father, she knew. Dead 6 years. The note had not been paid. With 6 years of interest under Colorado territorial statute, the current amount claimed was $6,800. The letter requested settlement within 30 days, or the note would be submitted for collection through the territorial court. She read it twice. Then she looked up at William. Your father borrowed money from Thomas Aldgate, she said. I didn't know that, William said. His voice was very quiet. In 1879. My father died in 1880. I inherited the ranch with everything on it. He took the letter back. I didn't know about this note. Could it be legitimate? My father. He stopped. My father had debts when he died. I paid them. I thought I paid all of them. Did you have a full accounting? A pause. A long one. The lawyer who handled the estate died 2 years after my father. His records went to a clerk who retired. I don't know where those records are. Amelia was quiet while she ran the calculation. A claim filed in Denver, delivered this week 3 days before a water rights injunction hearing. She looked at him. Will, this isn't a coincidence. He looked at her. Whitmore, she said. If he can't take the water rights through the court, he has a second approach. A $6,000 debt against the ranch creates financial pressure. If you can't pay it, you may have to liquidate assets, the east pasture, for example. William's face went very still, very cold. He bought the note, or manufactured it. Do you know anything about Thomas Aldgate? Nothing? Then we need to know everything, she said. Today. She went inside and came back with paper and a pen and wrote out 3 questions while standing at the porch railing. Who is Thomas Aldgate? Where did this note originate? Is there any record of it in Robert Dawson's estate documentation? She handed the list to William. Pruitt needs to see this letter today, she said. And he needs to investigate Aldgate before Thursday. If this note is fabricated or was purchased specifically to pressure you, Pruitt can file a counterclaim that changes the entire picture in front of the judge. You think it's fabricated. I think it arrived 3 days before your hearing and 6 years after your father died, and it would be very convenient for Lionel Whitmore if it were real. She held his gaze. Don't you? He looked at the letter. His jaw was set hard. I need to ride to Cheyenne again. Send Cord with a telegram first. It's faster. Send it to Pruitt and tell him about the note. She paused. And send one to the Denver Clerk of Records asking for any filing under Aldgate against Dawson. If the note was ever registered anywhere, there'll be a record. William stared at her for a moment, with an expression that was past recalibration entirely. Something that had gone all the way through surprise and come out the other side as something simpler and more complete. Amelia, he said. Send the telegrams first, she said. Talk later. He almost smiled. He handed the letter back to her and went to find Cord. Pruitt arrived from Cheyenne Wednesday morning with the telegram response from Denver already in his hand. He came into the kitchen where Amelia was making breakfast and set the telegram on the table without preamble. Thomas Aldgate, he said, is a private lender based in Denver who specializes in purchasing old and disputed debt. He buys notes that original creditors have given up on collecting, usually at a fraction of face value, and then pursues collection at full value plus accumulated interest. And the note against the ranch, William said. He was standing at the kitchen doorway. Denver records show it was filed 4 weeks ago. Pruitt looked at them both. Not in 1879, 4 weeks ago. The kitchen went quiet. 4 weeks ago, Amelia said. After Whitmore filed the water rights claim. Yes. He sold Aldgate a fraudulent note, William said. Or he created the conditions for one, Pruitt said. Aldgate's business operates in a legal gray area. He acquires verbal or informal debts that were never formally documented and converts them into enforceable notes by finding someone willing to sign an affidavit of original debt. He put the telegram in his satchel. The question is, who signed the affidavit claiming to have witnessed the original 1879 transaction? Can we find out? Amelia asked. I already did. He looked at her steadily. The affidavit was signed by Amos Carey. The name landed like a stone in still water. Amos Carey. The county surveyor who had told William he couldn't come to examine the creek because he'd been retained by Whitmore's legal firm. Amos Carey, who had been the county surveyor in 1879 and would have been plausible as a witness to any transaction from that period. Amos Carey, who was now signed to 2 separate documents supporting Lionel Whitmore's effort to take Dawson Ranch apart. William said nothing. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, and she heard the office door close behind him, and she looked at Pruitt. How bad is it? She said. The Aldgate note alone we can fight. A fraudulent debt claim with a suspicious origination date and a compromised witness. A judge like Hale will look at that hard. Pruitt's voice was careful. But Whitmore is running 2 attacks simultaneously. The injunction ties up the water. The debt claim creates financial pressure. Even if we beat both the cost of fighting both. How much will it cost to fight both? He told her. She kept her face neutral. And if we win, we can petition for legal fees. Whether we collect depends on Whitmore's willingness to pay, which in my experience is low. She looked at the kitchen wall for a moment. Then she looked back at Pruitt. Is there a way to resolve this in one move, rather than 2 separate legal fights? Pruitt looked at her. What do you mean? Whitmore's entire strategy depends on pressure. He needs both attacks working at the same time to make the position untenable. If one collapses, the other loses its force. She thought through it carefully. The Carey connection ties both attacks together. He's the surveyor on the water rights claim and the affiant on the debt note. If we can demonstrate to Judge Hale that a single witness connects both actions against William, that Carey is the linchpin of a coordinated campaign to defraud, we change the nature of both proceedings simultaneously." Pruitt stared at her. "You're not arguing two separate cases," she said. "You're arguing one case of coordinated fraud." The kitchen was very quiet. Then Pruitt said, "I need to write this down." He opened his satchel and took out a notebook and sat at her kitchen table and started writing. She went to find William. He was in the office standing at the window with his back to the room, and she came in without knocking this time and closed the door behind her. "You knew Carrie in 1879, she said. It wasn't a question. He surveyed the East Pasture that year. I wasn't here. I was in Colorado for 6 months working before I came back and took over from my father. He didn't turn around. He would have interacted with my father. So his affidavit has surface plausibility. Yes." She came to stand near him, not beside him, close enough to be present. "Pruitt thinks we can tie both attacks together as a single fraud case. It changes the argument entirely." He turned then. His face was not the controlled blankness, and it was not the rawness from the night before. It was something harder and cleaner anger, but organized. The kind of anger that doesn't spend itself on feeling. The kind that becomes fuel. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Any documentation from 1879. Letters, receipts, accounts, anything that shows what your father was doing financially that year. If we can show there was no transaction between Robert Dawson and Aldgate, or anyone Aldgate represents, the affidavit is exposed." "My father's papers are in the bottom drawer of that desk," he said. "I've never gone through them. Couldn't." He looked at the desk. "After he died, I put everything in there and left it." She looked at the desk. "I'll go through them," she said. "They're mine to go through." "I know, but you said you couldn't." A pause. "I said I hadn't." "Will." She looked at him directly. "Let me help you." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he crossed to the desk and opened the bottom drawer, and she saw the stack of papers inside, bundled with string, old and dry, and he stood back. They went through them together. It took 2 hours. He sat on one side of the desk, and she sat on the other, and they divided the papers, and she read with the focused attention she gave to everything that mattered. And he read with the slow deliberateness of a man opening something he had kept closed for a long time. At the end of the first hour, she found a letter. "Will," she said. He looked up. She read it aloud. It was a letter from Robert Dawson to a bank in Cheyenne dated October 1879, requesting a standard operating credit line. In it, Robert Dawson listed his current obligations and outstanding debts. The list was precise. The total was specific. Thomas Aldgate's name was not on it. Neither was any obligation approaching $4,000. He listed his debts, Amelia said, all of them, in his own hand, in 1879, and Aldgate's note doesn't exist. William looked at the letter. "That's his handwriting," he said quietly. "That's his hand." She gave him a moment with that. Then she said, "This letter goes to Pruitt tonight, with your testimony that it's your father's handwriting. It's not conclusive on its own, but combined with the timing of Aldgate's filing and Carrie's dual role." "It's enough," William said. His voice was different. She looked at him, and he was still looking at the letter, and his expression was the expression of a man who has just done something harder than fighting and come out the other side of it, going through his father's papers, finding not a debt, but a record of a man who had kept his accounts honestly. The particular grief and pride of it tangled together. She reached across the desk and put her hand briefly on top of his. Not the short contact she'd given Samuel, something more deliberate, and then drew it back. He looked up. "Thank you," he said. "We're not done yet," she said. "Thursday is tomorrow." He straightened. He picked up the letter. "I'll take this to Pruitt. Tell him about the coordinated fraud argument. Tell him we found the 1879 documentation." He stood. He was moving differently now. The organized anger fully present, channeled and purposeful, the way she had seen him move when something on the ranch needed doing, and there was no question in his mind about what to do. He stopped at the office door. "Amelia," he said. She looked up from the remaining papers. "When this is over," he said, "I'd like to talk to you about something." She held his gaze. "All right," she said. He put on his hat and went out, and she heard the front door close behind him, and she sat at his father's desk in his father's chair, with his father's papers spread around her, and she thought about a man who had never expected someone to come into his house and fight for it like it was already hers. The thing was, and she was only just understanding this herself, it already was. Thursday morning arrived like any other morning in Wyoming, which was to say without ceremony and with the full expectation that you would get up and meet it. Amelia was up at 5. She made breakfast. Samuel came down and ate and looked at her with his father's serious eyes and said, "Is today the court thing?" "Yes," she said. "Are you going?" "No, I'm staying here with you." He chewed, thought about this. "Is Papa going to win?" "Yes," she said. Not because she was certain she was not certain, but because Samuel was 8 years old, and some things mattered more than accuracy. He nodded. "Okay." William came downstairs at 5:30. He was dressed more carefully than usual. Cleaner, his hat brushed his boots, deliberate, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table Amelia had set, and at Samuel eating, and then at her. "Pruitt is meeting me at the courthouse at 9, he said. "I know. Holt has the work assignments for the day." "I know that too." He looked at her for a moment. In the morning light, he looked tired and steady, and very much like a man who had been fighting alone for a long time, and was still fighting, but was no longer alone, and was perhaps not entirely used to that yet. "I'll be back by mid-afternoon," he said. "We'll be here," she said. He picked up his hat. He looked at Samuel. "Mind Miss Carter today." "I always do," Samuel said, which was an outrageous revision of the historical record, and Amelia kept her expression entirely neutral. William left. The morning passed in the peculiar suspended way of mornings, when something important is happening somewhere else, and there is nothing to do but wait. Amelia kept them both busy. She had Samuel help her go through the kitchen inventory, a job that required enough counting and writing to occupy a mathematical boy, which he was, though he would have preferred to deny it. She had him read aloud to her for an hour while she worked on mending one of the horse books from Cheyenne, and his reading was good, better than she'd expected, with a natural cadence that suggested his mother had spent time with him that way. At noon she made lunch. At 1:30, she heard a rider in the yard. She did not run to the window. She finished what she was doing, set down the mending, and walked to the front door and opened it. Cord was coming across the yard on horseback fast, but not panicked, and he swung down before the horse had fully stopped and came toward the porch with an expression that was large and not quite readable from 20 feet. "Well," she said. He was grinning. She saw it when he got close enough. "Judge Hale denied the injunction," Cord said. And he didn't just deny it. He said from the bench that the federal designation was dispositive, and that the evidence of coordinated fraud between the water rights claim and the debt note warranted a referral to the territorial attorney general. Amelia gripped the porch post with one hand. "Carey's been subpoenaed," Cord said, "and Aldgate's debt claim has been stayed pending the attorney general's investigation. And Whitmore." Carver tried to argue the Creek precedent for about 10 minutes, and Hale cut him off. Cord was still grinning. Said the case had more holes than the argument deserved. Behind her, she heard small feet on the porch. "We won," Samuel said. She looked back at him. He was standing behind her in the doorway in his socks, having clearly come straight down from his room without stopping for shoes, with his book still in his hand. "Yes," she said. "We won." Samuel looked at her for a moment with an expression that was trying to be restrained and failing entirely, and then he did something she had not seen him do before. Not in 7 weeks. He smiled. Not the careful, tested, protected smile of a boy who had learned to be cautious with his happiness. A real one. open and full and sudden, the kind of smile that changes a face from the inside. She looked at that smile, and in the ordinary afternoon light of a Wyoming summer, with flowers still on her apron and a porch post under her hand, and Cord still talking behind her, and the ranch moving around her in all its loud and working life, something in Amelia Carter settled so completely and finally into place that she felt it in her chest like a key turning. She was home. Not the house she'd been born in, not the house she'd been sent from. This one. This loud, difficult, improbable, beautiful one. She heard the sound of a second rider coming through the gate, and she straightened and smoothed her apron and prepared her face for William Dawson, who was riding toward her across his own land, with the sun behind him and something in the way he carried himself that she had not seen before. He looked for the first time since she had known him like a man who had set down a weight he'd been carrying so long, he'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. She stepped off the porch to meet him. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. That was the first thing she noticed. The controlled urgency of it, the way a man moves when he has been holding something back for a long time, and the distance between him and the person he needs to reach has finally gotten short enough to matter. He handed the reins to Cord without looking at him, and Cord took them without comment, because Cord had been on that ride back from Cheyenne and had apparently understood what this afternoon was going to be before anyone at the ranch had. William walked toward her, and she stood her ground on the packed dirt of the yard and waited for him. And when he was close enough, she could see his face clearly. She understood that Thursday had not just been a legal victory. Something had broken open in him today. Not the controlled breaking she had watched happen in increments over 7 weeks. This was different. This was a man who had walked into a courtroom carrying everything alone the way he always had, and had stood up in front of a judge and won, using tools a woman he hadn't known 2 months ago had put into his hands, and the understanding of what that meant had apparently been working on him the entire ride home. He stopped 2 feet from her. "We won," he said, which she already knew, which Cord had already told her, which was not she understood actually what he was saying. "I know," she said. He looked at her with the full force of his attention, the kind of looking he reserved for things that mattered and was not casual about. "Pruitt told me in the courtroom after Hale made the ruling, he said he'd been practicing law in Wyoming Territory for 20 years, and he had never seen a civilian walk into a land office and come out with a single document that dismantled an entire fraudulent case." His voice was deliberate, careful with itself. "He said it to compliment me, and I told him he was complimenting the wrong person." She looked at him. "I told him your name," he said. "I told him what you found and how you found it and what you understood about it before I did." He paused. "He said he hoped I knew what I had." The yard was very quiet. Behind her she could feel Samuel on the porch, not moving, barely breathing, with the instinctive stillness of a child who understands that an adult moment is happening and that interrupting it would be a serious error. "What did you say?" she asked. "I said I was beginning to," William said, "and that I intended to do better than beginning." She looked at him for a long moment. 7 weeks of mornings and suppers and documents and arguments, and a boy who put the nightlight back in the socket when she was gone. 7 weeks of being useful and being present and being finally, for the first time in her life, somewhere that her presence made a difference. Not because she was tolerated, but because she was genuinely, concretely needed. "You said you wanted to talk to me," she said, "when this was over." "Yes, it's over." He took a breath. She had noticed over the weeks that William Dawson breathed differently when he was about to say something he couldn't take back. Slower, more deliberate. Like a man stepping onto ice he wasn't entirely sure would hold. "I know what I offered you when you came here," he said. "A home fair treatment and respect. I meant all of it. I still mean it." He looked at her steadily. "But I'd be lying if I told you that's still all of it. For me." She waited. "I am not good at this," he said. "I told you that. I'm going to say something, and it's going to come out plain, because plain is all I have, and I want you to know that plain doesn't mean it isn't that it isn't." He stopped. Looked at the ground for one brief moment, like a man checking that it was still there. Then back at her. "You came here, and you stood in my house, and you fought for it like it already belonged to you. And somewhere in the middle of that, I stopped thinking of it as my house and started thinking of it as ours. I don't know exactly when that happened. I know that when you left for Cheyenne, Samuel put the nightlight back on. And I know that I didn't sleep well either night. Her chest was doing something complicated. "You're not obligated to feel the same way," he said. "I know what you left behind. I know what this place cost you to come to. I know that choosing to stay and choosing to—" He stopped again, pressed forward. "I know they're different things. I'm not asking you to choose anything today. I'm telling you where I am, so you know." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "Will," she said, "I wrote a letter to my sister Cecilia from this house 7 weeks ago and told her I wasn't coming back." She held his gaze. "I didn't write that because I was angry. I wrote it because I already knew. 7 weeks ago, I already knew that this was where I was supposed to be." A pause. "I've been waiting for you to catch up." Something moved across his face that she had never seen there before. A kind of undone relief, the specific expression of a man who has braced so long for something not to be true, that discovering it is true, requires a moment of recalibration his face can't entirely contain. He reached out and took her hand. Not briefly, not in passing. He held it with both of his. The way you hold something you've decided matters. And he looked at her with everything unguarded. No management, no controlled blankness, just a man standing in his yard in the afternoon light holding on. "I'd like to ask you something," he said. "Ask it. I'd like you to stay. Not the arrangement. Not what we agreed to." His hands tightened slightly on hers. "I'm asking you to marry me. Actually, marry me. If you're willing." Behind her from the porch, she heard a sound that was Samuel making absolutely no noise with extreme effort. She looked at William Dawson rancher widower father, difficult quiet man who left field reports where she could find them and didn't sleep when she was away, and had looked at her face in a train station and seen something worth keeping, and she said, "Yes." From the porch, Samuel said, finally, in the voice of a child who had been waiting for adults to arrive at an obvious conclusion and had begun to despair of it happening in his lifetime. William closed his eyes for one brief second, opened them, looked at his son over Amelia's shoulder. "How long were you standing there?" "Since Cord came back," Samuel said without a trace of remorse. William looked back at Amelia. She was smiling. He had not seen her smile like that before, not the contained version she used with the ranch hands, not the warm one she gave Samuel. This one was full and real, and made her whole face different, and he looked at it with the expression of a man who has just understood something he should have understood considerably earlier, and intends to make up for lost time. "All right," he said quietly to her, and only her. And he was smiling too, the rare, unguarded kind that she had not seen him spend on anyone but his son until now. The first person Amelia told was Ruth, not out of obligation, out of the specific understanding that Ruth Hensley had stood at that stove beside her on the first morning without being asked, had put the plum preserves on the counter without being told, and had quietly, practically, and without any sentimentality whatsoever, been on her side from almost the beginning. That deserved to be the first word. Ruth received the news on the following Tuesday, standing in the kitchen as she always stood with a dish towel in her hand, and an expression that didn't change much because Ruth's expressions never changed much. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "About time," and went back to washing the pan. Amelia looked at the side of her face. "That's all you have to say?" "I knew 2 weeks in," Ruth said. "The way he was eating. Man who's got something to look forward to eats differently." She set the pan on the drawing board. "I was starting to think he'd wait until the boy went to college." "He's 8, Amelia said. "That was my concern," Ruth said. Amelia laughed. A real one, the kind that came from somewhere deep, and Ruth looked at her sideways with an expression that was the closest thing to a smile that Ruth Hensley typically deployed, which was still more than most people thought Ruth capable of. "You're good for this place," Ruth said, not softly. Matter-of-factly the way Ruth said everything. I want you to know I see it." Amelia looked at her. "Thank you, Ruth. Don't make it sentimental," Ruth said. "I've got bread to finish." The second person was Holt. She told him herself deliberately because she understood that some conversations mattered more when they weren't delivered secondhand. She found him in the equipment shed on a Wednesday morning, working on a harness with the focused attention he gave to physical tasks, and she came in and stood where he could see her and said, "Will asked me to marry him. I said yes." Holt kept working on the harness for a moment. His hands didn't stop. Then they did. He looked at her. His expression was the complicated one, not hostile, not the wall he'd given her in the early weeks, but something that was working through several feelings at once and being honest about the effort. "He'd tell you himself," he said. "Yesterday afternoon." Holt looked back at the harness. "He's not easy to live with," he said. Long silences. Won't say what he's thinking till it's already decided. "I know. Gets stuck in his head when things go wrong. Used to go 3-4 days without saying more than 10 words when the ranch had trouble." "I've seen it." Holt set the harness down on the workbench. He turned to face her fully, which she had learned was Holt's way of indicating that whatever he was about to say was not casual. "He didn't do that when Whitmore filed," he said. "Not once. You noticed that?" She had. She had noticed it and filed it without naming it. "He talked," she said. "To you," Holt said. "Every night. Came in, talked it through, went back out." He shook his head very slightly, the slow headshake of a man revising a long-held understanding. 14 years I've known Will Dawson. He has never talked a problem through with anyone. Not me. Not Ruth. Not his father when his father was alive. He looked at her steadily. "You did that." "He did it," she said. "I just listened." Holt looked at her for a long moment with the measuring look that she had first received as skepticism and had watched over weeks become something much closer to respect. "I was wrong about you," he said. "When you came, I was wrong." "You were cautious," she said. "That's different." "I was wrong," he said again firmly, the way a man says something he has decided to say cleanly rather than dress up. "I made it harder for you than it needed to be. I want to say so." She looked at him. "All right," she said. "I hear you." He picked up the harness again. "Congratulations," he said to the harness. "Miss Carter?" She smiled. "Amelia," she said. A pause. "Amelia," he said, and went back to work. The letter from Missouri arrived on a Thursday. Not from Cecilia this time, from her mother. It was the first communication from her mother since she had left with a green-clasped suitcase and not one person at the door to wave. It was 3 pages, which was more than her mother had ever written to anyone in Amelia's memory. She took it to her room and sat on the bed and read it. Her mother had heard through Cecilia about the wedding. Cecilia had heard through Amelia's previous letter, which Amelia had sent the week after the courthouse victory, telling her sister plainly what had happened with Whitmore, and with the ranch, and with a man named William Dawson, who had asked her a question she had said yes to. Her mother's letter was not an apology. She was not a woman built for direct apology, and Amelia had made her peace with that at some point between Missouri and Wyoming. What it was instead was a letter from a woman who was trying in the careful circling way of someone who has done a thing they cannot undo, and knows it to say something true. She wrote that she had watched Amelia leave and had not gone to the door and had thought about it every day since. She wrote that she had not known about Delia's letter until after Amelia was already gone, which Amelia believed only partially, but she believed the partial. She wrote that she had raised Amelia in the same house as her sisters and had not understood until she was gone what the house had been like for her, and that she was sorry she had not understood sooner. She wrote, "Your father and I would like to come and see you if you'll have us, if you're willing. We would understand if you're not." Amelia sat with that for a long time. She thought about the train platform in Missouri. The ticket slid across the table without a word. The kitchen window with her mother's face behind it. the sharp laugh she had carried in her chest across 1,000 miles of changing country. She thought about this house, the bread on the board, Samuel on the floor with the whale book, William's hands on the survey document and then on hers. She thought about the woman she had been when she boarded that train, and the woman she was now sitting on this bed, and the distance between them was not measured in miles. She took out paper and wrote back, "Dear Mama, yes, come in September when the summer work has eased and we can receive you properly. I want you to meet Will. I want you to meet Samuel. I want you to see what a woman can build when she's finally somewhere that lets her. I am not the same person you put on that train. I don't think you'll be sorry. Amelia." She sealed it, set it on the mail table, and did not think about it again that day, because there were things to do, and a ranch to run, and a wedding to plan, and a boy downstairs who had decided he needed her opinion on whether a horse named General was a dignified name or a ridiculous one, and she had her own thoughts on the matter. Tuck. The wedding was on the first Saturday of September. Ruth organized it, which meant it happened efficiently and without unnecessary sentiment, which was exactly how Amelia wanted it. The ceremony was in the small church in town, which was the only church within 40 miles, and which the minister, a thin man named Pastor Cole, who had performed a surprising number of weddings in a community this size, conducted with genuine warmth and a suitable brevity. The night before, Samuel knocked on her bedroom door. She opened it. He was in his nightclothes, holding the nightlight, the small one, the tin one he had put back in the socket when she left for Cheyenne, and looking at her with an expression that was trying for nonchalance and missing it entirely. "What is it?" she said. "I was just—" He stopped, started again. "After tomorrow, is your room still going to be your room, or are you going to be in Papa's?" She looked at him. "I'll be in your father's room," she said. "Yes." He processed this. "So your room will be empty. For now," she said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the nightlight in his hands. Then, very carefully, very casually, he said, "I was thinking, we could maybe put some of your books in there, the ones from the parlor. So the room wouldn't be empty." She looked at this boy, this 8-year-old boy who had tested her and watched her and let her read to him on the floor and eaten her bread, and said, "Okay," in the voice that meant more than okay, and she understood that this was not about books. "Samuel," she said, "what are you asking?" He looked at the nightlight. "I was just thinking," he said, "that it's a good room for a kid, if there was one, eventually." He looked up at her very fast and then back down. "Not that I'm just saying the room is there." Amelia leaned against the doorframe. She was quiet for a moment with the feeling of it, the wholeness of it, the improbable completeness of standing in a Wyoming hallway the night before her wedding, while a fatherless boy who had learned to check exits told her in the most roundabout way possible that he wanted a sibling. "It is a good room," she said. He nodded, once, firmly, as if a negotiation had concluded. "Good night, Samuel," she said. "Night," he said, and went back to his room and closed his door. She stood in the hall for a long moment, hand on the doorframe, looking at the ceiling. Then she went to bed and slept deeply and well. The ceremony was simple, short, true. When Pastor Cole asked if she took William Dawson as her husband, she said yes the same way she had said yes in the yard, without hesitation, without performance, without the complicated calculation she had applied to every major decision of her previous life. Just yes, clear and full. When he asked if William took Amelia Carter as his wife, William said yes, the way he said everything that mattered, once plainly looking directly at her, so there was no possibility of misunderstanding. He put a ring on her finger that had belonged to no one before her. He had ridden to Cheyenne 2 weeks earlier and come back with it in his shirt pocket. And when she had raised her eyebrows at him, he had said, "I wasn't going to give you a ring that came with a previous story." And she had looked at him for a long moment and thought that plain could sometimes be the most precise kind of beautiful. Samuel stood beside his father in a clean shirt he had tucked in himself and kept mostly tucked for the duration of the ceremony, which Amelia considered a significant personal achievement on his part. Holt, Pete Dutch, and Cord sat in the third row. Holt had his hat in his hands. He was sitting straight and looking at the front with the expression of a man who has decided to feel something he would not be discussing afterward. Ruth was in the second row and did not cry, which was entirely in character, and dabbed once at her eye with such swift efficiency that it was arguable whether it had happened at all. Afterward, in the yard of the ranch where Ruth and the ranch hands had set up tables with enough food to feed twice the people present, Amelia stood at the edge of the gathering with a cup of cider and looked at the thing that had been made. Not just today, not just this afternoon. Over 7 weeks of mornings and arguments and documents and bread and nightlights, and a boy on the parlor floor with a whale book, and a man who didn't sleep when she was gone. Over all the small accumulated days of showing up and being present, and refusing quietly without drama, without needing anyone to see it, to be the person her family had decided she was. William came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. He stood close enough that his arm was against hers and looked out at the yard with the particular quietness that she had stopped reading as distance and had learned to read as presence. "Your mother wrote," she said. He looked at her. "She and my father want to come in September." "What did you tell her?" "Yes," she said. "Come and see what I built." He was quiet for a moment. "You sure?" "I'm not the person who left Missouri," she said. "I can afford to be generous with that person's mother." He looked at her sideways with an expression that was warm and a little wondering and entirely his. "You're something Amelia Dawson." She felt the name settle on her, like something she had been waiting to put on. "Yes," she said. "I am." From across the yard, Samuel came toward them at a speed that suggested he had been running, and then remembered it was a formal occasion and adjusted to a very fast walk, which was not fooling anyone. He arrived between them slightly out of breath. "Ruth says there's cake," he announced. "Ruth made cake," William said. "She says to act surprised," Samuel reported. "So I'm telling you early so you can practice." Amelia looked at this child. Her child, she was allowing herself to think it fully, now not borrowed, not provisional. And she held out her hand, and he took it with the naturalness of a boy who had stopped checking whether things were safe to hold and had just started holding them. "Then let's go get cake," she said. No. 3 months later, on a November morning, when the first real cold had come down out of the mountains and settled over the ranch with the serious intention of staying, a letter arrived from the Territorial Attorney General's office. Amos Carey had accepted a plea agreement. His surveying license was permanently revoked. He had provided full testimony against Lionel Whitmore and James Carver in exchange for a reduced charge. Lionel Whitmore had been formally charged with fraud conspiracy and attempted extortion. His legal case would take months to conclude, but the territorial court had issued a preliminary injunction, the irony of which was not lost on Amelia, preventing him from engaging in any further land transactions in the territory pending resolution. Thomas Aldgate's operation in Denver was under federal investigation. William read the letter at the breakfast table and set it down in the middle of his eggs, and looked across the table at his wife. Amelia was helping Samuel with his arithmetic. Samuel had strong feelings about the educational value of arithmetic on a Saturday morning that were not aligned with Amelia's own views on the matter, and they were engaged in a negotiation she was winning because she had more experience in negotiation, and was, as he had noted, harder to argue with than expected. "It's over," William said. She looked up from the arithmetic, read his face, understood. "Good," she said, and went back to the arithmetic. Samuel looked between them. "What's over?" "A problem that's finished," William said. "The Whitmore thing." "Yes." Samuel thought about this. "Does that mean we don't have to worry about the water anymore?" "No," William said. "We don't." "Good," Samuel said in a voice that was almost exactly his father's voice. The same plain directness, the same refusal to inflate a thing beyond its actual size. "Because I was getting tired of hearing about it." William looked at his son. He looked at his wife. The kitchen smelled like coffee and cold morning, and something honest and warm, and outside the Wyoming winter was working at the windows, and inside the ranch house that had been silent for 3 years was full of the particular loud, ordinary music of a family. At breakfast, voices, chair legs on wood, the small arguments and the laughter underneath them, and William Dawson sat at the head of his table and felt for the first time in longer than he could accurately calculate that the life arranged around him was not something he was surviving. It was something he was living. He reached across the table and put his hand over Amelia's. Briefly, the way married people touch when the gesture means more than the gesture, and she pressed her fingers over his without looking up from the arithmetic. And Samuel made a face that was disgusted in the theatrical way of 9-year-olds who are not actually disgusted at all. "You're both embarrassing," Samuel said. "You'll survive," Amelia said. "Debatable," Samuel said. William picked up his coffee. And outside the creek that Lionel Whitmore had tried to steal ran cold and clear between the frozen grass exactly as it had always run seasonal. Faithful, belonging to no one, which in this country meant it belonged to everyone who was honest enough to say so. Dawson Ranch stood in the Wyoming winter, solid and permanent, built from the kind of work that doesn't ask to be noticed and doesn't need to be. And the woman who had walked out of Missouri with a green-clasped suitcase and no one at the door, the woman her family had packaged and sent west as a joke, as an embarrassment, as something to be discarded. That woman sat at the center of everything she had built with flour on her hands and a child beside her, and a man across the table who had looked at her face and kept looking. And she was so completely and fully herself that there was not a single spare inch of her left for anyone else's idea of who she should have been. She was Amelia Dawson, and she was exactly where she had always been going.